The early morning light fell gently over the rugged Greek countryside, illuminating olive groves and rocky hillsides that had long borne witness to the rise and fall of empires. A faint breeze drifted from the distant sea, laden with the brine of salt and the memory of countless ships that had once carried warriors and ambassadors across the Aegean. In villages, city-states, and grand temples, the murmur of discussion about the wars against the Persians continued unabated. For more than a decade, the Greeks had endured the looming threat of King Xerxes and his seemingly endless legions. They had witnessed the defiance at Thermopylae, the decisive naval clash at Salamis, and countless other engagements that tested their resolve. Yet the final fate of Greece, her independence and her honor, remained to be decided on a battlefield that would one day be immortalized as Plataea. Legends and rumors traveled swiftly. Some said the Persian king was convinced that after so many victories, his divine right to conquer was unquestionable. Others insisted that the resilience of the Greeks signaled a formidable barrier to Persian expansion. But among the Greek city-states themselves, there was a renewed sense of unity that transcended decades of rivalry. Athens, still recovering from the burning of her temples and the devastation of her city, looked not inward but outward, calling for allies to stand side by side. Sparta, proud of its martial legacy, stepped forward with an army that had been tempered by discipline and unshakable loyalty to its rigid code. Corinth, Tegea, Megara, and a tapestry of other polities answered the call, each contributing troops, supplies, and solemn prayers to the gods for victory. The tension across the land was palpable, like a tightly wound bowstring awaiting release. For the Persians, the invasion of Greece was more than just an act of conquest. It was a statement of power that reverberated across the empire. Persia stretched from the Indus River to the edges of Egypt, and from the scorching deserts of the Middle East to the highlands of Anatolia. It was an empire of formidable diversity, yet a singular will to expand under the banner of the great king. Xerxes himself had returned to Asia after setbacks, but his general Mardonius was left behind in Greece, with an army that still dwarfed that of any single city-state. This was not just about revenge for defeats. It was about ensuring that no threat to Persian hegemony remained. It was about subjugating the Greek people once and for all, or driving them into the very seas they used to master with their triremes. Amid these grand tides of war, individual stories of hope, fear, and ambition played out like threads woven into a tapestry. There was an Athenian hoplite named Aristides, determined not to see his city fall again to fire and sword. There was a Spartan warrior, Theocritos, who had lost a brother at Thermopylae and had sworn a solemn oath on the banks of the Eurotas River to avenge him. In the Persian ranks, men of many nations had come under Mardonius's banner, Medes, Scythians, Babylonians, and even Ionian Greeks who had once rebelled. Each soldier carried their own dreams, convictions, and doubts. Some marched toward Plataea because of loyalty or fear, others because of a fierce sense of destiny. As the Greek allied army gathered in the shadow of Mount Kithairon, they could see the Persian forces arrayed in the distance. Glittering in the sun were countless spears, curved bows, and richly adorned banners that bore the emblems of far-off lands. The hum of war drums rolled across the plains, accompanied by the strident calls of cavalrymen commanding their mounts. Although the Persian cavalry was lethal, the Greeks found solace in the knowledge that on rough or uneven terrain, the cavalry's advantage might be less decisive. And as seasoned warriors who specialized in tightly packed phalanxes, the Greeks knew they had a potent weapon in their discipline and the unbreakable wall of their shields. That night, the campfires stretched for miles around Plataea, both Greek and Persian. They glimmered like stars fallen to earth. In the Greek camp, men spoke in hushed tones about the next day's maneuvers. Some recited the epic poems of Homer, gleaning courage from tales of heroes who had once fought on the plains of Troy. Others offered sacrifices to the Olympian gods, hoping for a favorable omen from Zeus, Athena, or Ares. A certain quiet determination permeated the camp. Each soldier recognized that the fate of their homeland and the concept of Hellenic freedom rested on their spears, swords, and unwavering unity. Meanwhile, in the Persian camp, the mood was tense but confident. General Mardonius was no stranger to Greek warfare. He recalled the successes at Thermopylae under Xerxes, the sacking of Athens, and the prestige of the Persian cavalry. He believed the Greeks would eventually splinter from their alliances or succumb to bribes and threats. The constant political infighting among the city-states was legendary. It would only be a matter of time before they collapsed from within. Yet he knew all too well that the Greeks could be stubbornly formidable. Even so, the lavish tents and supplies symbolized Persia's abundant resources, and Mardonius was determined to crush the Greeks decisively to uphold Persian authority. As dawn broke, an eerie stillness settled over both camps. The plain of Plataea sprawled before them like a stage in a tragic drama, awaiting the actors who would fight and die. The Greeks shifted into position, each contingent led by its own commander, but united by a single goal. On the left, the Athenians formed ranks, their bronze helmets catching the pale morning light. On the right, the Spartans in their crimson cloaks stood stoic, spears upright in silent rows. The center was a mosaic of allied city-states, Corinthians, Tegeans, Plataeans themselves, standing shoulder to shoulder, locked in the phalanx. From afar, Mardonius aligned his own forces. Persian infantry faced the enemy in gleaming armor, each soldier aware that Mardonius demanded an all-out victory. Alongside them were the fearsome immortals, the elite of the Persian Empire, rumored to be as unending as the ocean tide. Light-armed archers, cavalry regiments, and Greek mercenaries who had chosen Persian gold over patriotism stood ready to surge forward. The roar of horns and the steady beat of drums signaled the opening of the conflict. Soon, the once peaceful plain erupted in a cacophony of metal striking metal and war cries that reverberated across the valleys. As the first clashes ensued, Greek hoplites realized the Persian cavalry would probe their flanks, testing for weaknesses. Waves of horsemen galloped forth, unleashing arrows and javelins upon the Greek lines. The Greeks, disciplined in formation, raised their shields overhead like a turtle's shell, fending off the projectiles. When the time was right, the Greek lines moved in disciplined lockstep, their long spears bristling outward like a deadly hedge. Persian horsemen found it challenging to penetrate a formation that advanced as a unified front. Some cavalry units suffered heavy losses as they encountered the iron-tipped spears and the bold rallying cries of the hoplites, who refused to retreat even an inch. Mardonius observed from the vantage point of his command, rallying his forces and dispatching orders for fresh attacks. He could see that the Spartans on the right flank were particularly unyielding, and he ordered an intensified assault on their positions. The Persian archers unleashed volley after volley, the sky darkening with a swarm of arrows. But Spartan discipline, honed by relentless training from childhood, held firm. Generals like Pausanias, the Spartan regent, orchestrated unit movements with precision. Spartan hoplites advanced in tight phalanx, refusing to be driven back, even under the relentless barrage. On the other side, the Athenians faced a division of Persian troops that included Ionian Greeks. A moment of confusion arose as Greeks found themselves fighting Greeks, but the Athenians called out to them, imploring them to remember their shared heritage and break away from Persian rule. Some heeded the call, defecting mid-battle, creating chaos among the Persian lines. Others fought on, driven by fear of retribution or loyalty to Persian gold. This interplay of conflicting loyalties only intensified the ferocity on both sides. As the sun climbed higher, the heat of the day became overwhelming. Dust kicked up by thousands of stomping feet, and galloping horses hung like a haze over the battlefield. Sweat drenched the warriors, stinging eyes and making shields slippery to hold. Men gritted their teeth, ignoring the grit in their mouths and the pounding of their hearts, focusing only on the next thrust of the spear or slash of the sword. Cries of pain intermingled with deafening war shouts. In the swirl of chaos, it became increasingly difficult to distinguish friend from foe. Corpses of the fallen lay strewn across the ground, and the wounded crawled for shelter or succor. Through it all, the determination of each side did not waver. At mid-battle, a tactical withdrawal by the Greeks nearly threatened to shatter their lines. Rumors spread that the Spartans were retreating, and the Athenians hesitated, fearing the alliance might break. Mardonius, sensing an opening, pressed the advantage, ordering a full-scale assault against the Greek center. However, the withdrawal turned out to be strategic. The Spartans lured the Persian cavalry into a disadvantageous position close to the uneven terrain near the foothills of Mount Cathaeron. Unable to maneuver efficiently, the horsemen became entangled, and Greek skirmishers rained down missiles upon them. Then, with a thunderous roar, the Spartans reversed direction, charging headlong into the Persian lines while they were disorganized. The shock of that counterattack reverberated throughout the entire battlefield. Pausanias, leading the Spartans, locked eyes with Mardonius, who stood visible in his ornate armor. In that pivotal moment, both generals knew the clash would soon reach a decisive crescendo. Mardonius threw himself into the fray, determined to rally his men and break the Greek line. His bodyguard, the elite immortals, surrounded him like a wall of steel. But the Spartan phalanx, bolstered by allied contingents, rolled forward in an unstoppable wave. Spears jabbed with lethal precision, and the Greek war cries rose above the din like peals of thunder. Suddenly, Mardonius was struck down amid the carnage. The Persian general's fall sent a shockwave through his army. Many Persians, upon seeing their commander felled, lost the nerve to continue the fight at the same level of intensity. Confusion rippled through the ranks, and the once cohesive assault began to unravel. Persian officers attempted to regain control, but the impetus was gone. Greek phalanxes, smelling the scent of victory, pressed harder. One by one, Persian lines gave way, retreating in disarray toward their fortified camp. The Greek soldiers chased them, seizing momentum. The Spartans and Tegeans were among the first to breach the Persian camp's palisades, battling hand to hand in the cramped confines. Women in attendance within the camp screamed as chaos engulfed their tents. A lesser-known group from the Greek alliance, hailing from tiny city-states, found themselves face to face with Persian engineers and camp followers, who defended themselves with whatever weapons they could find. Everywhere, hope clashed with despair, and in the swirling dust, the Greek triumph began to take shape. By late afternoon, most of the Persian army had either fled, surrendered, or lay prone on the battlefield. Only isolated pockets of resistance remained, quickly overwhelmed by the combined force of the allied Greek contingents. Despite their victory, the Greeks did not rejoice in unbridled celebration. The price had been steep. Countless men lay dead or dying on the scorched earth, and the living were left to contemplate the magnitude of their achievement. They had repelled one of the greatest armies in the world and safeguarded the future of Greece. Yet the sorrow for fallen comrades and the pang of loss for a generation of young men was a bitter harvest indeed. Over the next few days, the Greeks gathered their dead for solemn rites. Funeral pyres lit up the dusk sky, sending pillars of smoke spiraling into the heavens. Families from distant city-states traveled to Plataea to reclaim the bodies of their loved ones. Spartan mothers, known for their stoic hearts, shed silent tears as they wrapped their sons in simple shrouds. Athenian widows prayed for the safe passage of souls across the river Styx. Priests offered sacrifices, sprinkling barley and pouring libations of wine in thanks to Zeus, Eleutherios, the protector of freedom. The unity forged in the fires of battle shone brightly during this time of mourning. In the Persian camp, the horror of defeat was keenly felt. Survivors gathered what remnants they could and hastily withdrew to friendly territories, some seeking refuge in Thebes, which had sided with the Persians. The Greek alliance, however, was resolute in its determination to punish Greek traitors. Thebes was eventually besieged and forced to surrender to allied forces. The message was clear: the days of bowing to the great king were over, and those who aided Persia would face dire consequences. The newly won peace changed the political landscape. Athens, though devastated by the war, rose swiftly to rebuild its walls and secure its navy. Sparta, proud of its land forces, returned home in triumph, but cast a wary eye on the growing maritime power of Athens. Still, for a fleeting moment, the Greek city-states basked in the collective pride of having vanquished a mighty empire. The war had proven that when united, the Hellenes could achieve what seemed impossible. Philosophers in Athens and beyond marveled at how swiftly the tides of fate could change, and how the spirit of freedom could prevail against overwhelming odds. In the years following the Battle of Plataea, stories and songs immortalized its heroes. Poets composed verses that recounted the final clash with Mardonius. Plays dramatized the courage of the woman who disguised herself as a man to fight alongside her brothers. Sculptors carved statues of the hoplites in their bronze armor, capturing in marble the resolute posture of men willing to offer their lives for the ideal of liberty. Commemorative monuments sprang up near the battlefield, detailing the alliance of city-states that had fought side by side. Amid the echoes of these stories, legends of divine intervention abounded. Some whispered that the ghosts of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans had descended from the slopes of Mount Cithaeron to guide the allied army. Others believed Athena's owl had circled overhead, an omen of wisdom blessing the Greek cause. In shrines and temples, priests interpreted omens in the flight of birds and the reading of entrails, each seeking to prove the gods' favor in the moment of final victory. Regardless of the truth behind these sacred tales, they served to unite and inspire a generation of Greeks who would go on to shape the intellectual and cultural destiny of the Western world. Among those who had fought at Plataea, there were survivors whose lives would never be the same. Aristides, the Athenian hoplite, returned to a city still marked by charred ruins but alive with the promise of renewal. He took an oath in front of the rebuilt altar on the Acropolis, vowing never to let Athens fall again. Theocritus, the Spartan, carried the memory of his fallen brother and found a measure of closure in Mardonius's defeat. He believed that his brother's spirit had been avenged by the crimson-tipped spears of Sparta. Yet, the lullaby of war's end did not erase the nightmares that replayed in his sleep, of men screaming, of blood spattering the ground, and the eyes of dying comrades reflecting the horror of that day. In towns across Greece, victory celebrations blended with grieving, each city-state commemorating its dead with festivals dedicated to the gods. At these gatherings, bards recounted the details of the battle in stirring verse. Children, barely old enough to carry wooden swords, reenacted the clash on make-believe fields. Elders nodded gravely, recalling how close they had come to total subjugation. And in the minds of all, there was a realization that they had taken part in a monumental chapter of history. The word Plataea became synonymous with defiance, resilience, and ultimately triumph. Even Persia felt the repercussions. Though vast and still formidable, the empire's aura of invincibility had been pierced. Xerxes, who ruled from his majestic palace at Persepolis, received the news of Mardonius's death and the catastrophic defeat with seething anger. He diverted his attentions eastward and to administrative affairs, letting go, at least for the moment, of the dream to add Greece to the empire's domain. Persian envoys who had once demanded earth and water as tokens of subjugation from the Greeks found their requests denied. The facade of Persian omnipotence had cracked. Over time, alliances that had been so strong in the face of a common enemy began to fracture. Athens developed the Delian League, asserting naval supremacy and forging new ties with city-states eager for mutual defense. Sparta and its Peloponnesian allies eyed this development warily, sensing an imbalance of power. The seeds of future conflicts were sown. culminating in the Peloponnesian War years later. Yet, through it all, the memory of Plataea lived on, reminding Greeks that unity once saved them from annihilation. For generations to come, Plataea was evoked in political debates, artistic endeavors, and religious ceremonies. Ambassadors from foreign lands journeyed to behold the site, a quiet plain where small cairns of stones marked mass graves of warriors. Philosophers gazed upon the fields and pondered the nature of valor, destiny, and the interplay of mortal effort with divine will. The shifting seasons transformed the battlefield from green to gold to a blanket of snow, but the eternal resonance of what had been decided there could never be erased. Legends sprung from the lips of traveling minstrels, each adding an embellishment or two. In some retellings, entire phalanxes had soared above the ground, lifted by the breath of Zeus. In others, the Persian immortals were described as literal phantoms who rose from the ashes only to be vanquished once more by Spartan steel. Certain tales gave voice to the farmland itself, personifying the soil as a goddess who absorbed the blood of the warriors and wept with the tears of orphans. Through these retellings, the story of Plataea took on a mythical veneer, but the historical truth remained more profound and instructive. When divided, the Greek city-states could fall prey to invaders, but when united, they could thwart even the greatest empire of their time. The intangible spirit of that unity was felt especially keenly in Athens. With her walls and fleet rebuilt, she became a beacon of art, philosophy, and democracy. Statesmen like Themistocles, though controversial, embodied the ambition to see Athens rise to unparalleled heights. Playwrights like Aeschylus, a veteran of the Persian Wars, shaped theater into a venue for exploring the moral and existential questions that war raises. Poems and inscriptions praised the unwavering courage displayed at Plataea, offering it as a moral template for future generations. A similar sentiment echoed in Sparta, albeit framed by Spartan austerity and tradition. The Spartans saw in Plataea the validation of their lifetime devotion to martial discipline, an ethos that demanded self-sacrifice, unwavering obedience, and unwavering loyalty to the collective cause of defending the homeland. Yet not all the aftermath was glorious. The land itself bore scars that took years to heal. Fields once used for wheat or grazing were littered with the debris of war. Broken swords, smashed helmets, and arrowheads that glinted ominously beneath the sun. Survivors of the battle, both Greek and foreign, often returned to gather spoils, scavenge leftover equipment, or claim the personal effects of their fallen comrades. Some unscrupulous individuals pillaged gold and silver from the dead, stoking tensions among allies. The final counting of the dead took months, and many families never recovered the remains of loved ones. In that sense, Plataea was also a wellspring of sorrow, a reminder that every heroic deed carries a shadow of loss. Despite these grim realities, the overarching narrative that took root in the collective Greek consciousness was one of triumph and deliverance. As foreign dignitaries passed through Athens and Sparta, they heard stories not just of gods and heroes from the distant past, but of living men and women who had shaped history through sheer will. They learned how a precarious alliance of rival city-states defied an empire that had conquered lands stretching thousands of miles. And they discovered that at the heart of this defiance was a belief in freedom, a principle so potent that it galvanized farmers, potters, philosophers, and warrior kings to stand as one. In the decades that followed, as new conflicts emerged and old rivalries reignited, the story of Plataea remained a touchstone. When Corinth or Thebes quarreled with Athens, statesmen invoked the memory of united ranks at Plataea to coax them back to reason, reminding them of the greater good. When Spartan kings contemplated expansions or alliances, they measured new adversaries against the might of Persia, recalling with pride their pivotal role on that famed day. Even the architects who constructed temples across the Greek world quietly added artistic references, friezes depicting hoplites battling exotic foes, a subtle nod to the epic confrontation that had cemented Greece's cultural identity. Foreign scribes and merchants carried these accounts to distant lands. At ports in the Levant and Egypt, one could hear travelers speak of the Greek victory over the Persian giant. Some doubted the authenticity of the tale, insisting it must be embroidered. Others saw in it a lesson about the limits of imperial power. Over time, word traveled further east to Babylonian enclaves and even beyond the Caucasus, where local warlords harbored their own ambitions. The name Plataea became synonymous with an unlikely yet monumental stand for independence. Among the soldiers who survived, the scars ran deep. Many found it difficult to return to normalcy, haunted by the images of severed limbs and dying cries that echoed in their minds. A small group of veterans from different city-states formed a type of unofficial fraternity. They would gather annually at Plataea to pour libations for the fallen, exchange stories, and console one another in a bond forged under the sword. Over time, their hair turned gray and their voices grew softer, but their hearts swelled with the knowledge that they had participated in something larger than themselves. Their children and grandchildren would hear stories straight from their lips, bridging the gap between legend and lived reality. As the years progressed, some of these veterans channeled their experiences into crafts or the arts. An Athenian armorer who had once marched in the phalanx began forging ceremonial helmets etched with scenes from the battle. A Theban potter who had defected to the Greeks at the last moment painted vases illustrating the cavalry charges and the stoic lines of Spartan hoplites. And in Sparta, a reclusive blacksmith hammered out blades that bore inscriptions of honor and freedom, his hammer's rhythmic clang reminiscent of war drums echoing across the plain on that fateful morning. Eventually, the generation that had fought at Plataea started to pass away. Their funerals were marked by processions filled with laurel wreaths and olive branches, while orators spoke of the unbreakable bond between men in war. Even as time claimed those who had first-hand knowledge of the conflict, the memory of their deeds found new life in the hearts of historians, poets, and statesmen. The victory at Plataea was woven into the bedrock of Greek identity, a testament to what could be achieved when courage overshadowed fear and unity eclipsed discord. With each retelling, new layers of meaning emerged. Some future philosophers framed Plataea as a triumph of reason over tyranny, emphasizing the political ramifications of independence. Others cast it as a moral lesson, suggesting that those who love freedom will always find the strength to defend it against overwhelming odds. Military strategists studied the maneuvers at Plataea, analyzing the cunning retreat, the phalanx tactics, and the decisive charge that toppled the Persian command. Even centuries later, generals from distant realms leafed through scrolls describing the battle, seeking insights for their own campaigns. And yet, for all its grandeur, Plataea remained, at its core, a very human story. It was the tale of farmers who set aside their plows to take up spears, of potters who exchanged clay and kilns for shields and swords, of aristocrats who risked their comfort and status for the common cause, and of entire families who faced the specter of enslavement and chose to stand firm. This deeply personal element resonated across cultural and temporal divides, ensuring that the lessons of Plataea would endure as long as humans admired bravery and yearned for self-determination. As the Greek world evolved, new conflicts emerged to replace the old, but the specter of the Persian threat loomed large in memory. The Delian League, which once championed collective defense, transformed into an Athenian empire, eventually provoking the Peloponnesian War. Sparta, for all its heroic virtue, found itself drawn into alliances with former foes. The fluid nature of power politics swept across the peninsula, leading to a future shaped by shifting alliances and betrayals. Yet even amid these upheavals, the achievements at Plataea continued to inspire. Generals invoked the spirit of 479 BC to rally their troops. Politicians cited the unity of old to attempt bridging new divides. The battlefield, once drenched in the blood of thousands, reverted to a pastoral calm. Shepherds grazed their flocks amid the gentle slopes. Farmers tilled the land, sometimes uncovering arrowheads or fragments of Persian daggers. Occasionally, visitors would come to pay homage, placing wreaths at makeshift shrines. Over centuries, the outlines of camp fortifications vanished, but the significance of Plataea never faded. To walk those plains was to step through a portal to one of Greece's most defining hours. In the end, the war for Greece was not solely about territory or subjugation. It was about preserving an ideal, a culture that valued debate, arts, and the pursuit of wisdom. A society that, for all its internal rivalries, cherished the notion that individuals had a right to govern themselves. The victory at Plataea sealed this ideal into the annals of history. Though the city-states would bicker, fight, and sometimes even betray each other afterward, the notion of freedom they collectively defended remained steadfast, echoing through the centuries as a beacon of human aspiration. Within that vast tapestry of events, the Ionian Revolt, Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and finally Plataea, none shone brighter for the Greeks than the last. It stood as the culminating symbol that their homeland would remain free. The battered plain, dotted with the remnants of war, was the crucible where a people's unbreakable resolve triumphed over the might of an empire that once seemed invincible. Even now, when the modern world speaks of courage, unity, and the relentless pursuit of liberty, it draws upon the echoes of that plain, where Spartans and Athenians, Corinthians and Tegeans stood as one. And though time has claimed the voices of those who fought, their legacy endures, an undying testament to the power of steadfast conviction in the face of overwhelming odds. Such was Plataea's gift to history, an affirmation of what men and women can achieve when they unite for a cause that transcends the boundaries of their individual city-states. The war for Greece was won not through divine intervention alone, nor mere happenstance, but through the determined hearts that beat in unison behind bronze shields. And so, through eons and empires to come, the story of Plataea, bold, tragic, and triumphant, will forever echo across the pages of human memory, reminding us that freedom, once truly understood, can become an unstoppable force capable of reshaping the destiny of nations.